Let's give this a second here. Hello, hello. Let's see who's out there. I think I see Tom. See who else is out there. We'll give this a second. See who wants to hang out and talk for a second. So I'll just jump right in because it's getting late and I don't want to make this go too long. So, and my wife is just walking to the door, so I'm gonna have to run here shortly, but I'm just gonna say that this is the Econ 101 talk, right? And you know, folks, the president did not have to be a genius to fix the economy, right? It didn't take any kind of genius. I go back and I look at the comments from POTUS 44, where he talked about, what kind of magic wand is he going to have? And I just decided to do this because a little while earlier I did a video. I was doing a radio interview with my buddy Clint Bellows out there in Omaha, Nebraska. And if you happen to be in the Omaha area, I do his radio show like twice a month, sometimes 3 times a month, but at least twice a month. So here's the thing. So we're just talking about the economy. I'm not going to sit here and talk about the whole illegal immigration thing or what's happening at the border because it's inundated everybody's news feed. So I'm sure you're well aware of that, and you're probably bored with that, for lack of a better word. But let's talk about the economy for a few minutes and how the economy is just booming, how the economy is just moving right along. And I just finished sharing something from former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who was a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and she was chair of the Jordan Commission, right? Hey, how you doing, Ms. Travis? Stacy Kennedy, Chris Levels, what's going on, brother? So I just want to say hi to you guys. So Barbara Jordan, who was chair of the Jordan Commission, I think in 1997, and one of the things she talked about was that I guess I'll delve into immigration for a second, but that's not the whole point, was that for immigration to continue to serve our national interest, it must be lawful. There are people who argue that some illegal aliens contribute to our community because they may work, pay taxes, send their children to our schools, and in all respects, except one, obey the law. Let me be clear, that is not enough. That was from U.S. Representative Barbara Jordan, who did pass away in 1996, I believe, but she's a black woman, right? And here's what she realized is that illegal immigration is not in the best interest of America as a whole, and it's certainly not in the best interest of black folks. So it's just a trip to me when I see Congressional Black Caucus members out there who are so in favor and so supportive of illegal aliens, more so than they are supportive of their own constituents. And, rather than work with the president to sit there and do what they, what they're hired to do, right, which is to look out for the welfare of their constituents, not try to get more welfare for them, but to look out for the welfare of those constituents to help them out economically. And so it's just amazing to me how some people don't get that, fixing the economy didn't take a rocket scientist. It just took somebody who understood Econ 101. And I always tell them, listen, I worked in the IT field for a long time. And when you work in the IT field, and I've done everything from desktop support and everything like that, and people think that you're a genius when you fix their computer. But really, in some cases, all I've done is reboot it. Or I'll ask somebody, hey, is it plugged in, right? Is it even plugged in? And I go back, and I was talking to Clint about this. Let's go back to 2012, the 2012 elections. And what you had was Mitt Romney running, and they were trying to criticize Mitt Romney because he had his money offshore, or had a large amount of his money offshore. And the question is, well, if that was going to be what would help your money grow, why would you not have it offshore, right? If you looked around and you saw the policies that were basically making your money shrink, then I mean the logical thing is to move away from discomfort, to move towards your personal growth. And so if your money is going to grow more offshore, then by all means put your money offshore. The question, and Bill Whittle from PJTV did a great job of kind of answering and saying, here's the things that Mitt Romney should have said in during his campaign, and he should have defended himself, is like, instead of commenting and instead of trying to criticize Mitt Romney for having his money offshore, we should be asking, why is your money not here in America? Or why is it not a better deal to have your money here in America? The simple fact of the matter is, the only thing that President Trump has done, right, he's not creating jobs, right? Let me make sure the president is not creating jobs. The only jobs he can create, if you will, are jobs directly within his administration, within the White House, within the executive branch. And he's not creating those jobs. Those are jobs that have already been, there's funds allocated and he can fill those jobs. But he's not out there creating jobs. And so I'm not saying that as a criticism of him. He's not creating jobs. He has simply plug the economy back in. He's removed the barriers. He's removed the shackles that were keeping the economy from growing. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. It's like if you ever watch like athletes, sprinters, or just people who are working on their speed, right? Speed is everything. You'll see people working out and they'll be running and they'll be like pulling a sled, right? Or you'll see runners and they'll have a parachute attached. And the whole thing is that by running with resistance, right? Because what it is, resistance training, you get stronger by facing resistance. All resistance is not necessary, but you do get stronger by that. And what's happened is that the American economy has been moving along at an abysmal, anemic, like 2% growth rate throughout the Obama administration. We've been running with a parachute. We've been running while pulling a sled. And the only thing that President Trump has done is says, you know what, let me cut that parachute off of you. Let me cut the chains from that sled, that weighted sled off. And you know what's happening? Boom, the U.S. economy started to sprint. We're looking at breaking world records, if you will, in terms of economic growth. For one simple reason is we've removed the barriers, we've removed the chains, the restraints on the U.S. economy. The restraints that were just keeping us from growing. I always promote free enterprise, right? What is free enterprise? It is when we as individuals, we the people, are free to be as enterprising as we can be, without, of course, violating the unalienable rights of our fellow man. That's inerrant, right, in capitalism and free enterprise. The gist of it is to not violate the unalienable rights of your fellow man, which is why when people sit there go, oh yeah, but slavery, you don't understand. If you mention slavery, when you're talking about capitalism and free enterprise, you don't understand unalienable rights. Okay, I mean, it's like everything is voluntary exchange. So if somebody is held in bondage, that's not capitalism. Because you can't own a human being, right? That's not free enterprise, because you're violating the unalienable rights of other people. Capitalism and free enterprise are inherently moral, because it's based off of two individuals engaging in free trade, voluntary exchange. One person has a product, good, or service that they've created, and another person has, we'll say currency, right? Because currency has changed throughout the years. Another person has currency, and the producer of that product, good, or service values your currency more than they value the product, good, or service they created. The person with the currency values that product, good, or service as being offered more than they value their currency. And so they reach a mutually beneficial relationship. And people say stuff like, well, there's price gouging and so on and so forth. We need big government to help prevent that. You don't understand. At the end of the day, people, the price system, and that dude, Thomas Sowell makes it clear, the price system is what allows you to fairly ascertain your own values. So you're going to sit there and say, you know what, I value this more than I value that. So maybe I value water more than I value bread, whatever it is. Just throwing out examples. The price system allows you to exercise your values. That's the beautiful thing about capitalism and free enterprise. It's all voluntary. The price system, the invisible hand, and that's what Adam Smith talked about, the invisible hand. That is the basis of Austrian economics, of free market capitalism, is all voluntary exchange, and nothing gets better. Hear me, nothing gets better when you allow a third party, i.e. government, to get involved in the mix, to be able to start making decisions in that. And as I've said, it's like this. Here's an example I've used, and I'm going to make this short before I run. You have baseball cards, right? And it's funny, I had to raise my chair up, right? Because I had said the other, my chair is going dead. And so, so the Pistons, so if I start shrinking down while I'm talking, that's what I was talking about. But anyway, so one person has baseball cards, and maybe that person got those baseball cards from their grandfather or whatever. And maybe they happen to have a Hank Aaron rookie baseball card, right? Well, if they don't care about that baseball card, what value are they going to place on it? Little to none. But maybe to someone who is a baseball card lover, who's a collector of that, they'll sit there and go, man, that's worth quite a bit. But maybe instead of cash, they're exchanging bubble gum, right? So the person who has the baseball card likes bubble gum. They don't care about baseball cards. They find somebody who says, hey, man, my grandfather gave me these cards. One of them's got this guy Hank Aaron on it, whatever, right? So the person, he says, well, listen, man, I'll take it off your hands. I've got bubble gum. I'll give you, I'll give you 5 pieces of bubble gum for that Hank Aaron rookie card. And the person who, once again, doesn't care. This card is just a piece of cardboard to them. It's this piece of cardboard with some picture on it. It doesn't have any value to them. But they're like, well, I'll tell you what, how about you give me 10 pieces of bubble gum? And the other person says, well, I'm not willing to pay 10. I'll give you 7. And the other person says, well, dude, okay, how about you give me 8? And so the person says, tell you what, man, I'll give you 7.5. I'll take this, I'll give you 7, and I'll tear one piece in half. I'll give you 7.5 pieces of bubble gum in exchange for that card. The other person says, deal. And they start to make the exchange, but then along comes somebody with a government badge and says, hold on a second. I'm from the government. I'm from the National Baseball Trading Card Federation or whatever, right? Association or whatever government agency, rather. So National Baseball Card Trading Agency that regulates the sale of all baseball cards. And they say, we have it here in our bylaws that baseball cards cannot be traded for less than 10 pieces of bubble gum. And in fact, a Hank Aaron baseball card has to be traded for at least 20 pieces of bubble gum. Well, here's the thing. What if nobody believes that a baseball card is worth 10 pieces of bubble gum? And certainly they don't believe it's worth 20 pieces of bubble gum. So what ends up happening is that both people are hurt because the one person wanted bubble gum more than they wanted this card. The other person wanted the card more than they wanted to give up, the bubble gum. So at the end of the day, everybody's hurt. But here comes the white knight with their badge and the government badge and saying, hey, I just stopped something from taking place that we feel shouldn't have taken place. What was that? It was 2 human beings exchanging a product, good, or service at a price that they both had agreed upon. Nobody was going to be hurt. And that's the thing that, those of us who are Christian constitutional conservatives, we believe that's why government should be limited. Because you just hurt the economy. You just stopped economic growth. You just stopped free trade, fair exchange, voluntary exchange from taking place. And who benefits? And yeah, thank you, Brother Levels. I'm sitting here today, was rocking in my look, and so there you go, Brother Levels, Lions all the way. I always say, listen, man, I rode with the Lions when they were 0-16, man. So if I can ride with them when they're 0-16, I'll ride with them, till we win a Super Bowl. And there's going to be a Super Bowl. Look, if the Philadelphia Eagles could win a Super Bowl, so can the Lions. Holding up faith, right? But anyway, hey, Crystal, I'm just seeing a few other people and just want to say hi to everybody who's tuned in during this. Supposed to be brief, which is going to be brief. I'm going to cut this short here. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of point this out that President Trump did not have to be a genius to fix the economy. All he did was, it's like he plugged it back in. It's like you're on your computer, and I'm sure there's somebody listening who's tried to boot up their computer at some point and was just like amazed, like, why is my computer not turning on, right? And then they realized that it wasn't plugged in, right? And they're like, wow, it's not even plugged in. And it's one of those cases like where you like, you ever been walking and like you trip and you turn around to see like, what did I trip over, right? And you just tripped over your own feet, you know, you just want to see who was watching as you tripped over your own feet, or, you know, and it's one of those things you just look around like, did anybody see that I just forgot to plug in my computer and was wondering why it wasn't working? Well, that's the same way. It's like, this is the magic wand that President Trump had. He plugged it in, or he just basically took the chains off. He removed the barriers. People, I'm telling you, listen, this economy, unless congressional Democrats get involved and start trying to put more chains back on, or unless congressional Republicans really get stuck on stupid and decide that they would rather be swamp creatures than actually take part in helping to make America great again, this economy is going to continue to grow. And everybody thought that he was tripping if saying the economy would hit, 4% growth or whatever like that. Listen, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we got closer to 5% growth. And the only thing that we're going to do at that point is we hope that the Fed, right, the Federal Reserve, we hope the Federal Reserve doesn't feel like they need to dramatically raise interest rates to kind of help slow things down. Listen, if this was a fake economy, right, if this was a economy that was built purely off of speculation, then yeah, you might want to slow that down, right? Because otherwise you're going to lead to a bust. But as I was talking to my buddy Carl Reed about this the other day, the Fed, that's a whole nother bucket of rats, right? That the Fed was created to help stave off the very thing that it actually helped to create, right? If you go back in time, there was a recession, and J.P. Morgan, who at that time was the Wall Street guy, basically he and a bunch of other Wall Street guys got together in a smoky room and they basically fixed the economy. They kept the economy from failing. And here's the problem. You had a lot of big government people who had a problem with that. They really thought that it was a problem that there were people in the free market who had the power to help stave those things off. Now, it wasn't those people who created the problem, but they helped to solve the problem. So what do? They advocated for the creation of a quasi-government agency, the Fed, which is not answerable to anyone other than the fact that I guess Fed governors are voted on and appointed by the Senate. But otherwise, the Fed's not accountable to anyone to take care of monetary policy. And they were created to stop depressions. But yet, on their watch, we've had several depressions. And listen, if it weren't for the fact that the mainstream media has been in the hopper, has been fully in support of POTUS 44, they would have correctly labeled what we had from 2008 to 2017, basically, as a depression. Now, and I'll say this one last thing. It's interesting. Herbert Hoover was responsible. He was at the helm, a Republican, right? He followed behind Calvin Coolidge. Herbert Hoover was in charge when the Great Depression happened, right? The crash of Wall Street, 1929. He was in charge. And you know what? This was not the first time there was a crash on Wall Street. This just it's just part of the cycle. This is the creative destruction of the free market. It happens. But what happened is that he gave into the urge to do something. He felt like as government, he had to do something. So everything that he did exacerbated the problem. And then 1932 comes around, right? And we're still in the several years into this Great Depression, and we elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he went full commie, right? Full scale socialist, the New Deal, right? And everything he did, just he really brought gallons of gasoline. And the only reason why the United States got out of the Depression was World War II, right? It had nothing to do with any of the economic things. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but he was the Secretary of Treasury to FDR. And he is quoted as basically saying, we've tried everything and nothing has worked. All their actions that they did to try to fix the economy through legislative means failed. And this is a simple reason why. Washington, D.C. can't fix the economy. So everybody who tries to advocate to say, well, Washington, D.C. should do something. No, Washington, D.C. should not. Washington, D.C. should sit on its hands and mind its own business, right? Because if they're not, then all they're doing is they're interfering in free trade. The economy can and will and does fix itself. It doesn't need government intervention. So what you had a big government minded Republican who was at the helm when the Great Depression, and then he was followed by a huge government Democrat. And so we had basically a decade of depression. Funny how that happened basically from 1929 until 1941. Well, you fast forward and wow, look at what happened in 2007. Right? You had a big bubble. There was an economic bubble. There was a tech bubble began to bust. And you had a big government Republican in George W. Bush in charge. And rather than say, you know what, hey, I'm going to take my hands off, this thing will fix itself, right? He said, no, he gave into the pressure. And in the last year or so of his office, he decided to do something. And you know what that did? That sent the American economy into a tailspin. He basically destabilized things by putting weight on, by putting obstacles in, and the American economy went into a depression, which it was a depression. And then he was followed behind by a huge, massive, mega government weapons grade moron by the name of POTUS 44, who, man, he did everything he could to just sink the economy. Right? Luckily, the American economy is more resilient than that. And we have a president right now who knew that and believed in that. So all he did was plug it back in. He took the chains off. And now the American economy is starting to boom. It's just starting. It's not booming. The American economy is not booming yet. It's just starting to boom. So, keep your eye out, man. It's going to be pretty fascinating to see what happens in the near future. But once again, the president, he didn't have to be a genius to fix the economy. He just had to not be a moron. That's it. And that's why, listen, here's the thing. The president of the United States, what the Constitution said he is number one, commander in chief, right? The president of the United States is commander in chief of the most powerful military the world has ever known. Number two, he's head of state of what was and once again is the most influential nation on the world stage. And three, he's the chief executive officer of which is way too big of a federal government, right? So I think our federal government is $2.9 trillion, somewhere in that neighborhood. So he's the chief executive officer of a massive bloated government. But the most important thing is that massive bloated government has way too much influence over our roughly $20 trillion economy. And guess what? The American economy drives the rest of the world's economy. And so we had a weapons grade moron who was our chief executive officer for far too long, who was hurting America and hurting the world with his worldview in his public policy. So all you have is someone who doesn't have to be a genius. He just realizes that, if I take my foot off the neck of the American economy, it'll get back up on its own. So anyway, listen, I got to run, folks. Thank you for listening in. Take care. God bless.